Well, I first played at York Mills down in Hogs Hollow at the old Jolly Miller, which is still there at the foot of Yonge Street and York Mills Road. And it was an outdoor rink. A gentleman named Mr. Smith was the proprietor, and he went in there, and they had a big, huge tree in the middle of the rink. It was an outdoor rink, almost the size of a parking lot. And pleasure skating was on one side of the tree, and hockey was played on the other side. I was never in an indoor arena until I was about 12 or 13.
Myself, I started playing, I guess, for the first time in Midland. The little peewees, you know, the little guys. And then we moved to Toronto, to North York. And I wound up playing, actually, Herb Carnegie started with his group, the Future Aces, up in Willowdale at Mitchell Field, which was an open air ice surface. Boy, it was cold up there. Oh, the wind used to whistle. And I wound up eventually coaching for some of the minor groups under Herb's supervision. And then I went on from there and played in the MTHL for a few years as well. So that was probably in the mid-50s.
I can remember what Brian's saying. I started playing probably in 1944. I was maybe 12 or 13. That was my first organized hockey playing indoors. But before that, I grew up in Leaside and skated down at Millwood Park and outdoor rink. And I can remember when a heavy snowfall, they used to take the end boards out of the rink and bring the horse in with the plow, and they'd plow the rink with the horse, and then the game would start. Yeah. And after then played minor hockey in Toronto in the THL and minor midget, and then went on to play junior in Galt.
I've learned more about my father's career from others than certainly I experienced. He died when I was 12, so I never saw him play, and I never saw him play professionally. I did see him play in an old-timers game in Montreal with Uncle Charlie, and I think Uncle Roy might have also been part of it. And this would have been probably right around 1950, and that was the only time I ever saw him play hockey. Well, I think my father was a multi-talented sportsman, and so I don't think he ever looked upon, and I don't think others really looked upon hockey as being maybe his best sport or his #1 sport. I think his first love in sport was lacrosse. I think he was a very skilled football player as well. But I think that I had understood that he played hockey because hockey was the only sport back in those days where you could make any money in athletics. And so that's how he got in. He didn't start to play hockey till he was 16 years old. Wasn't a great skater and was a defenseman. And I think was one of the first defensemen that sort of went down to block shots. Certainly not like they do today, but that idea, and I think that would have been probably his most significant trait as a hockey player, and he was tough.
He certainly was tough, because I heard the story from Gus Barker, who played with Uncle Lionel in Montreal Maroons, and he told me a story about being in Detroit to play a game, and usually Gus relied upon Lionel to protect him, because Gus was a little guy, and so they got in. Gus got in this fight in Detroit, and he was really getting beaten up badly, and he was looking around for Lionel. And when the fight was over, he skated over. He managed to make his way over to the bench, and there was Lionel sitting on the bench. He said, "What happened? You didn't come to get me. You know, you didn't help me. Why?" So Lionel says, "Well, it was a $25 fine. if I left the bench.
Well, I'd like to ask Brian, but it's my recollection for the era, Uncle Lionel was a very offensive defenseman, wasn't he? He was, aside from what you were saying about blocking shots, but I think he was offensive, wasn't
Yeah, no, I think offensive in more ways than one. I think that Uncle Roy was the most skilled hockey player of the three brothers. I think my dad started late and wasn't that proficient a skater. Uncle Charlie was big and rugged and had a tremendous shot. But I think Uncle Roy was the most skilled and had the most finesse.
Well, I was lucky enough. I got a chance to see Roy play, so like I didn't see my Uncle Lionel play, or I didn't see my dad play, but I had a chance to see Roy, and I have to say that I wanted to be like Roy.
Yeah, Jack Adams said that it was the biggest mistake he ever made, trading my dad to Detroit. And by the way, my dad roomed with Gordie Howe in Gordie's first year in the NHL. So they spent that year together.
And Roy was wearing number 9. Howe was wearing something like 17, and he didn't get 9 till they traded Roy,
Yeah.
and then he got 9, and of course made it famous, right? And well, I think I'm sorry, like it's so long ago now, and I think hockey fans now don't probably recognize that far back, and it's kind of a little bit lost in the history of hockey. What my dad did, what he went through, and the way he played, and what he was, what he meant to the game. I'm kind of sorry that this is so far in the past tense. It isn't for me, but for hockey fans, younger hockey fans. They don't know Charlie Conacher, and they don't know Lionel Conacher or Roy Conacher probably, and I'm sad about that, because I'm proud of what they did, and how, you know, and doing what they did.
I didn't feel any pressure. My dad never put any pressure on me to do it. I mean, if I wanted to do it, you know, he encouraged, you know, if you don't want to do it, go out and do it. But nothing about, you know, you got to go to the NHL or you got to, you know, play this or that.
Yeah, I didn't have any pressure, obviously, because my father had passed away. My mother certainly never, the most important thing in our household was that you got an education. And the sports came secondary, and I did a lot of sports. I played football as well, and track and field, and other sports. But I never felt any pressure to play. And as I said, the idea of becoming a professional hockey player was something that didn't evolve until I was in my early mid-20s. But when I played high school sports and stuff like that, there was always the reference to son of or whatever. And well, I don't think I've been exposed to that from the time I was very young. And I don't think consciously I was all that aware of it. But I'm sure that there was always this pressure, I think. And it wasn't a bad thing, because pressure isn't bad, you know, to make you try to perform better. But I think there was a pressure to try to make you perform, you know, because your name was Conacher. But the other side of that coin was that the farther I got away from my father's death, the greater the legend became, and I was still the same. So it was a losing battle. You could never compete, and I realized as a very young age that I could never compete against the legend of my father, and so I think that reduced a lot of the pressure.
I don't think there was ever any pressure put on because I was my dad's son from players or from management. I think I put pressure on myself because of my dad, and which probably didn't help me. But there was, when I was playing in Buffalo, there was one fan sat behind the goal, and in the warm-ups when you're skating around, and every game he'd yell at me, he says, "You'll never be as good as your uncle." And I'd say to myself, "Yeah, I know that, but just keep going, you know." But you know, just laugh about that afterwards, sort of thing. But I don't think anybody put pressure on, but I think I put pressure on myself.
I would have to say that his father probably lifted the whole family out of the poor economic conditions that we're in. I mean, they were moving from house to house practically because they had to, you know, get out or be evicted. My dad told me stories about having to walk on the railway tracks, pick up coal for the furnace. So I mean, both of their dads were really instrumental in bringing our family right out of poverty.
They were tough times. You know, they were playing hockey through the Depression. It was a big family of 10. It lived in the Jesse Ketchum, Cottingham area in the central part of Toronto. Our grandfather was a teamster. I mean, it was to provide for 10 children was really really something, and these gifts that they had, and I think that the sisters in a different era, in today's era, would have all been probably every bit as good as the brothers were as athletes. They just wasn't that opportunity back then. But I think my father recognized that sport was a way to economically improve themselves in a way that, you know, that there was no other way at that time.
Yeah, after he left hockey, professional hockey, he decided to coach, and so he got involved with the group that organized the junior C team in Midland. And they were a great bunch of guys. I always remember them hanging around our house. I think he was well loved by all the boys who played, and they went on to win the provincial championship. And I don't think Midland's ever won championship again. I may be wrong on that, but you know, he did a really fantastic job, and he had kids come back to him years afterwards to tell him that they really appreciated his mentorship and his coaching skills at that time. Yeah.
Well, I think the word that thought that springs to mind is inspirational. Father Bauer was, I think in his own right, had he not chosen the priesthood, may well have been an NHL caliber player, as was his brother Bobby. But he chose the priesthood, but he stayed involved with hockey at St. Mike's. And my first real experience with Father Bauer was when I was playing for the Marlies. I think it might have been 1960-61. And we were playing against St. Mike's, and Father Bauer was the coach for St. Mike's, and Jerry Cheevers was in goal. I mean, they had a really good team. But we had them, and the Marlies had a really good team. And a lot of people were talking the Marlies were going to go to the Memorial Cup. And we had the St. Mike's team down 3-0. And we lost the series, 4-3. And it all came down to coaching. Turk Broda was our coach and didn't really have control of our team. We had sort of an interesting team. We had some guys that were, a few players that were still in school, of which I was one, and we had a lot of guys that had abandoned school and thought, you know, they were going to make it in pro hockey. And it was an older, more mature group. Most of the players that were going to school went to St. Mike's because the Maple Leafs had control of both the teams. But the St. Mike's had a team, and we were just out-coached. And Turk couldn't control the team, and as a result, we ended up losing. And St. Mike's went on to the Memorial Cup. I think, against the Edmonton Oil Kings. So I realized right there that Father Bauer, you know, was an exceptional coach. And then I got involved. He called me in the summer of 1963, and I had been working in the summers as a tour guide on European tours, and I'd done it for 2 or 3 years, and I was just literally about a week away from going away, and Father Bauer called and went over his vision for this new concept for a national team program, and to replace the era of the senior, Allen Cup champion being able to go and play against the best in Europe. That era had passed, and they were looking for a new concept. And Father Bauer evolved that concept around the national team program, and that players could combine school with the pursuit of excellence on the ice, and it was just a chance to go to the Olympics in 1964 in Innsbruck. And I can remember when I was making this decision, I still wasn't thinking about playing professional hockey. I had actually gone to the University of Western Ontario, and I had played intercollegiate football. I didn't even play hockey the first year I was at university, and ended up being an all-star on the intercollegiate football for Western. And so hockey wasn't, you know, top of mind or anything like that. But I can remember my mother saying in all of my father's athletic endeavors that he regretted that he did not go to the Olympics. And I think he had a chance in 1928, I can't remember whether that was an Olympic year, but I think it was, but whatever it was around there, that he had a chance to go to the Olympics. I think it might have been in track and field or something like that, and that he didn't do it. And I can remember my mom saying that, you know, if in making the decision, that was one regret he had in his sports career. And I thought, well, with that sort of in mind, and the chance to play under Father Bauer, and this concept, because I was a big believer, still am, about the being able to combine athletic excellence with the academic side, and that's evolving and has come a long, long way since those days. I went and played, and had I not played for Father Bauer, and the disciplines and the structure and the coaching, because Father Bauer was a teacher, and most of the coaching back in those days didn't involve a lot of teaching. I think it did involve mentorship, and you played hard for a person, but I think that Father Bauer was truly a teaching coach. I would have never made the NHL.
Well, I just recognize from stories what he did, what he meant to the game of hockey, and he was, like I said before, he was very flamboyant, especially off the ice too. And they're all memories that I'll have forever. My dad.
Well, my dad was pretty shy, and he never really put himself out there as sort of accomplishing what he did. So I guess the one memory I do have that really sticks out is, as Brian pointed out, after hockey is a tough time for somebody who's reached that, the pinnacle. And I remember him saying that, he really wondered whether or not he'd done anything with his life. And, I tried to say to him, anybody that reaches the pinnacle where you led the league, in scoring, you got 2 Stanley Cup to your name, what more is there? You're the top of your profession. And you look back and you should take a lot of pride in that. I certainly took a lot of pride in him for doing that. I think it was just amazing, as both of their fathers as well.
I think, based on what Peter said earlier, is that I think the role of the Hockey Hall of Fame with each passing day becomes more important to the generation of the CONACHER'S, because the game has changed, the marketing, the presentation. the flash, the splash is just so magnified around marketing and the high profile and not always total substance that back in the old days it was pretty basic. It was, the NHL wasn't always successful. It had teams that folded and teams that regenerated. There was 2 teams in Montreal. There was 2 teams in New York. So I think that to preserve that link with the past, the role of the Hockey Hall of Fame is even more important than ever before. And as we go forward, there'll become a time when people will have to rely on the memory about what's going on today. With respect to my father, I unfortunately, he died when I was very young. He never really pushed me in sports in the brief time that I was with him. And I think the only regret that I have is that he was not acknowledged as Canada's athlete of the century, because I don't think there's been anybody in sport that did or will ever be able to do again what he did.